When 12 black SUVs rolled silently across a dark airport tarmac at 3 in the morning, no sirens, no flashing lights, just the cold February air and the sound of boots on concrete. Nobody was supposed to know it was happening. But it was happening. The FBI had been planning this night for 7 months. 7 months of secret meetings, hidden files, and a team of agents who could not tell their own families what they were working on. 7 months that all started because of one young woman, a regular airport worker named Priya, who saw something she was never supposed to see inside a suitcase that was never supposed to open. And at the center of it all was one of the most powerful and famous men on the entire planet, Elon Musk. His private jet, one of the most expensive planes money can buy, was sitting alone at the far end of Dallas Love Field Airport that night. Cream-colored, quiet, dark. The kind of plane that almost never gets questioned because the people who own planes like that almost never get questioned. Almost never. The agents climbed the stairs. They moved through the cabin. And then they made their way to the cargo hold, the hidden storage area underneath the plane, where 5 matte black suitcases sat neatly strapped and waiting. What happened next stopped everyone cold. Because when a veteran FBI evidence expert named Howard Beale, a man who had spent 30 years opening seized bags and boxes and cases without ever once reacting to anything he found, crouched down in front of those suitcases and looked inside the first one. He went completely still. He did not move. He did not speak. He just looked. And the agent in charge, a woman named Dara, who had been chasing this case through 7 months of sleepless nights and cold dinners, and the kind of quiet sacrifice that never makes the news. She climbed into that cargo hold, crouched down beside him, and looked too. What they found inside those 5 suitcases set off a chain of events that reached all the way to the highest levels of the United States government. Senior officials started resigning. Expensive lawyers started getting phone calls in the middle of the night. A mysterious plane took off from a private airport in New Jersey and disappeared somewhere over the Mediterranean Sea with its tracker turned off. And deep inside a classified facility that doesn't appear on any public map, so 2 scientists were studying one single object, a small black device the size of a hardcover book, with a port on it that none of the FBI agents had ever seen before. And what those scientists discovered about that device left everyone who heard it completely, utterly speechless. This is the story of what was really inside those bags. This is the story of the woman who first saw it, the agent who spent 7 months proving it, and the secret that was so big that the people who found it could barely say it out loud. Stay with us through this entire video, because the answer to what that device actually was and the name of the person who built it is coming at the very end. And when you hear it, just like everyone else in this story, you will not make a sound. The Whataburger on South Congress Avenue in Austin, Texas, never really closes. At any hour, on any day, someone is always there. A night shift worker grabbing a honey butter chicken biscuit at 4 a.m., a college kid sobering up over a large orange juice, a truck driver pulling off I-35 just long enough to feel human again. On a muggy Tuesday morning in August 2024, a silver Honda Civic sat in the far corner of the parking lot for 41 minutes without moving. Inside it, Priya Venkataraman was trying to remember how to breathe. She was 29 years old. She had a master's degree in logistics management from the University of Texas. She had an apartment on Oltorf Street with a balcony she never used and a houseplant named Gerald that was somehow still alive despite everything. She had a mother in Plano who called every Sunday and a best friend named Deja who could always make her laugh. No matter what. None of those things were helping her right now. Her coffee sat in the cup holder, untouched and cold. Her work bag was in the back seat. Her phone was face down on the passenger seat because she could not stand to look at it. She had been crying. Not the soft, dignified kind of crying that looks okay in movies, but the ugly, shaking kind that takes over your whole body and leaves you feeling hollowed out and strange. She had a decision to make. She had known it for 4 weeks. She had been running from it for all 4 of those weeks. And this morning, sitting in this parking lot with the Texas heat already pressing against the windows at 8 a.m., she understood that she had run as far as she could go. Priya worked for a company called Skybridge Elite Services. The company's official description, the one on their website, and next to a photograph of a gleaming private jet at sunset, was bespoke ground operations and logistics facilitation for distinguished aviation clients. What that meant in actual practice was this: when extraordinarily wealthy people landed their private jets, Priya and her colleagues made sure that everything that was supposed to happen happened quietly, quickly, and without the kind of friction that regular people accepted as a normal part of travel. Customs documentation, cargo coordination, ground transportation, the moving and logging and securing of luggage that ranged from designer suitcases to packages that were never opened in front of her and were never, under any circumstances, to be discussed. She had been good at this job, careful and quick and discreet. Her supervisor, a compact, an efficient man named Ron, who communicated almost entirely in approving nods, had told her 6 months in that she had the best instincts of any logistics coordinator he had hired in a decade. Good instincts, it turned out, could be a liability. It had started small. A discrepancy in an inventory log for a flight that had arrived at Dallas Love Field on a Thursday evening in late May. The cargo manifest listed 5 items under the category Personal Effects, Diplomatic Documentation. Priya had logged them in, initialed the form, and thought nothing of it. Then the same 5 cases appeared on a different flight 3 weeks later. Same dimensions, same matty black casing, same custom combination locks that were not standard luggage locks. They were the kind of locks Priya had only ever seen on cases used by government security details. The same category on the manifest: Personal Effects, Diplomatic Documentation. Different tail number on the jet. Different registered operator. Same cases. She noticed. She told herself it was nothing. She initialed the form and went home. 2 weeks after that, during a routine weight distribution check before departure, one of the cases shifted in the cargo hold. The latch, either improperly closed or slightly damaged, she never knew which, came open a crack. Just a crack. Just for a moment. Priya looked. She couldn't help it. She was standing right there. Then she closed the case carefully, straightened up, finished her checklist, and walked back to the operations office with her face completely neutral and her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had not told anyone. For 4 weeks, she had carried it alone, at her desk, at dinner, in the middle of the night when she woke up at 3 a.m. and stared at the ceiling and tried to convince herself that she had misread what she had seen. But she was a woman with good instincts, and her instincts had never once told her she had misread it. The thing that finally broke the 4 weeks of silence was a photograph. She had been scrolling through news on her phone on a Sunday evening when she saw it. A picture taken at a technology summit in San Francisco, published by the Associated Press, dated July 2024. It showed Elon Musk mid-handshake with a foreign official, a diplomat whose name Priya recognized. She recognized it because 3 months earlier, She had been accidentally copied on an internal background briefing document at work, a document that named this same official in connection with the very client whose cargo she had been handling. That document had been recalled by email 20 minutes after it was sent. A message from the company's operations director had followed it. Please disregard and delete. Sent in error. Priya had deleted it. She had also, without fully knowing why, taken a screenshot first. She sat in her apartment kitchen with the news photo on one screen and the screenshot in her deleted photos folder and the memory of that open case in her mind. And she stayed there for 2 hours without moving. Then she opened her laptop and typed 8 words into the search bar. How to contact the FBI without being identified. She did not feel brave. She did not feel righteous. She felt terrified and exhausted and very, very alone. She felt like a woman standing at the edge of something enormous, looking down, understanding that once she stepped forward, there was no stepping back. She opened a document. She started typing. The time in the corner of her screen read 11:58 p.m. She typed for 2 hours and 14 minutes. 11 pages, single-spaced. She included dates, tail numbers, case descriptions, the names of 2 ground crew members who had received unusually large discretionary bonuses in the weeks following specific flights. Bonuses she had seen reflected in payroll documents she had legitimate access to as part of her coordination role. She included the screenshot. And she included one photograph she had taken on her phone the day of the weight check. Low resolution, slightly blurred, taken in under 2 seconds before she closed the case and walked away. She read the whole thing once. She did not let herself read it twice, because she knew that if she read it twice, she would talk herself out of sending it. She pressed submit at 2:17 a.m. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. Gerald the houseplant sat on the windowsill, quietly and unhelpfully alive. In Washington, D.C., the night shift analyst assigned to the FBI's digital tip intake system was on her 3rd cup of coffee when a new submission appeared in the queue. She almost skipped it. The queue had 340 items that night, and most of them were the usual noise. Something made her click on it. She read the first 3 pages and sat up straighter. She read the next 4 and picked up her phone. By 9 a.m., the submission had been flagged, elevated, and printed onto the desk of a special agent in the FBI's Financial Crimes and National Security Fusion Unit in Washington. The agent's name was Dara Okonkwo. She read the 11 pages twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the best forensic financial analyst she had ever worked with. "Clear your calendar," she said when he answered. "For a while." In Austin, Texas, Priya Venkataraman finally picked up her cold coffee, took a sip, made a face, and started her car. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. But somewhere, in a secure federal building 4 states away, someone was already turning the first page. Dara Okonkwo had a rule about her desk. Everything on it had a place. Her coffee on the left, always. Case files stacked by priority, right side, never more than 3 high. A small framed photograph of her father Emmanuel at her college graduation. The one where he was looking at her instead of the camera, the way parents do when they are trying to memorize a moment. Positioned at the back corner where she could see it without looking for it. She had kept some version of this arrangement for 11 years. Through 4 promotions, 6 office moves, and more cases than she could count, without opening a file drawer. The photograph had moved with her every single time, and she was looking at it now. The 11 pages Priya Venkataraman had written at 2 a.m. were spread across her desk in a way that violated her usual arrangement completely. She had read them twice already. She was about to read them a third time, which was something she almost never did. Not because she was impatient, but because by the third read, if something still had her attention, she had learned to trust that feeling without needing to justify it. This had her attention. She stood up and walked to the window. The FBI's Washington field office sat inside the J. Edgar Hoover building on Pennsylvania Avenue, a brutalist concrete structure that managed to feel both imposing and somehow apologetic about itself. Outside, the city was doing its ordinary morning things: taxis, commuters, a food truck already setting up on the corner with cheerful optimism about the lunch crowd. Dara watched none of it. She was thinking about tail numbers. She was thinking about the way Priya had written: careful, sequential, specific. The way someone writes when they are terrified but determined not to be dismissed. She had seen 100 tips over the years. She could tell the difference between someone who had noticed something and someone who had understood what they noticed. Priya had understood. The 11 pages were not the work of someone looking for attention or revenge or a settlement. They were the work of someone who had tried very hard not to see something and finally accepted that they had. Dara respected that more than she could explain. She went back to her desk and picked up the photograph she had printed. The low-resolution one Priya had taken in under 2 seconds in the cargo hold. She held it under her desk lamp. The image was blurry along the edges, slightly overexposed from the cargo bay's fluorescent lighting. But the corner of the open case was visible. And what was visible in that corner made the skin on the back of her neck do the thing it did sometimes. A kind of tightening that she had stopped dismissing as imagination somewhere around year 3 of her career. She had not arrived at this desk on this morning by accident. She had grown up in Worthington, Ohio, a suburb outside Columbus that was pleasant and quiet and largely unremarkable except to the people who lived there and loved it. Her father, Emmanuel, had built his accounting firm in a rented office on High Street over 15 years of early mornings and late nights, and the kind of patient, disciplined work that never looks heroic from the outside but holds everything together from within. When Dara was 14, a man named Douglas Hale and 2 business partners approached Emmanuel with an investment opportunity tied to a real estate trust operating across 4 Midwestern states. The documents were professional. The projections were convincing. The men were well-dressed and confident in the particular way of people who have learned that confidence, performed correctly, can substitute for honesty in most rooms. Emmanuel invested. He encouraged 3 colleagues to invest. He believed in it for 14 months before the structure collapsed, and the money, all of it, and every dollar of the savings he had built through 15 years of early mornings, was gone. The legal process that followed lasted 2 years. Douglas Hale received a fine of $340,000 and 18 months of probation. He was photographed leaving the courthouse in a suit that cost more than the fine. Dara had been in that courthouse. She had watched her father's face when the sentence was read. Emmanuel Okonkwo was not a man who showed pain in public. He had been raised not to. But she saw it anyway. A brief, quiet collapse behind his eyes, there and gone in a second, like a light flickering in a room you pass in the dark. She had thought about that flicker a great many times since. She had not become an FBI agent to avenge her father. She was too precise a thinker for that kind of simple narrative. But she had become one with a very clear understanding of something that law enforcement culture sometimes forgot. Financial crimes were not paperwork crimes. They were not victimless arrangements between consenting parties in expensive suits. They were violence committed slowly, with documents, against people who trusted the systems they lived in. Her father had trusted the system. The system had handed Douglas Hale a fine he paid without blinking. Dara had decided, at 17 years old, watching her father drive them home from that courthouse in silence, that she was going to spend her professional life making the systems better than that. 11 years in, she still meant it. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Heilbrunn at 9:03 a.m. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was already at his desk, and which was where Marcus almost always was. He was 44 years old, a forensic financial analyst who had joined the FBI after 8 years at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and he approached financial document analysis the way some people approached crossword puzzles, with a focused, almost cheerful persistence that never seemed to diminish regardless of complexity or hours worked. He was not a flashy person. He drove a 7-year-old Subaru. He ate the same lunch 4 days out of 5. He coached his daughter's soccer team on weekends with the same methodical attention to detail he brought to money laundering investigations. His wife had once told Dara, at a bureau holiday party, that Marcus was the only person she had ever met who seemed genuinely content. Dara thought that contentment was one of his greatest professional assets. It made him unshakable. "I'm sending you something," she said when he answered. 11 pages and 1 photograph. I want you to read it before I tell you anything about it." "How soon?" he said. "Now." A brief pause. She could hear him already moving papers on his desk, making room. "Give me 40 minutes, he said. It took him 32. When he called back, he didn't open with a greeting. "The tail number variations," he said immediately. 3 changes in 18 months. That's not administrative. Someone was managing visibility." That's what I thought. The bonus payments she referenced, if those are documented in payroll records she had legitimate access to, that's not speculation. That's a paper trail. "I know." A short silence. Then, "Dara." The photograph. "I know," she said again. Another silence. Longer this time. Not the kind that meant he was sitting very still at his desk, looking at something on his screen, arriving at the same place she had arrived at 2 hours earlier. "Who is the client?" he asked. She told him. He didn't respond immediately. She could hear him breathing. "Okay," he said finally. His voice had not changed. That was Marcus. Steady, level, the same tone for routine paperwork and extraordinary circumstances alike. But he said it again, more quietly. "Okay." And in that second, "okay," Dara heard the thing he wasn't saying out loud. The weight of what this meant, who it involved, what it would cost to follow it, what it would cost not to. She understood. She felt it too. "Clear your calendar," she said, "for a while." Outside on Pennsylvania Avenue, the food truck finished setting up for lunch. So a pigeon landed on the windowsill and looked in at nothing in particular and flew away again. Dara Okonkwo picked up the photograph of her father and set it back in its corner of the desk. Then she opened a new case file, and she gave it a name. The case file had no name on its cover that would mean anything to anyone who stumbled across it. It was labeled, in the dry bureaucratic language that federal investigations used specifically to be boring, as Prelim Fin 2, 1024, 4417th. Financial Preliminary Investigation, Calendar Year 2024, 4417th case, opened in that classification that year. It sat in a restricted digital folder that required 2 separate authentication steps to access, and existed on a server that was not connected to the FBI's general internal network. 4 people knew it existed, then 6. Then, carefully and slowly, 9. Dara had hand-selected every one of them. The team assembled in a conference room on the 4th floor of the Hoover Building on a Wednesday morning in early September 2024. The room had no windows. The table had a coffee stain near one end that had survived what appeared to be years of industrial cleaning attempts. A whiteboard on the far wall was blank and waiting. Dara stood at the front. She looked at the people she had chosen and felt the particular weight of a moment that could not be unmade once it began. "What I'm about to share with you doesn't leave this room," she said. "Not to supervisors outside this chain, not to spouses, not to anyone who isn't sitting at this table right now. If that's a condition you can't meet, I need you to say so before I begin. And there will be no record of you having been in this room." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. She picked up a marker and wrote 4 things on the whiteboard. A tail number, a company name, Stratus Meridian Holdings, LLC, a date, and a single question mark. "This is what we have," she said. "Everything else is what we're going to find." What followed was not exciting. Dara would tell Thomas this on multiple evenings over the following months, usually sometime after 10 p.m. when she finally got home, sitting at the kitchen table while he reheated whatever dinner had gone cold waiting for her. She was not complaining. She did not really do complaining. But she wanted him to understand why she came home looking the way she came home looking. "People think this work is dramatic," she told him one October evening. A bowl of reheated soup in front of her that she was eating without tasting. "They think it's like the movies. Confrontations and car chases and moments of revelation." Thomas sat across from her, giving her the particular quality of attention he had that felt like the whole room leaning in. "It's spreadsheets," she said. "It's calling someone and having them hang up. It's driving 4 hours to an airport in New Jersey to talk to a ground crew worker who takes one look at your badge and suddenly can't remember anything he's ever seen or heard in his entire professional life. It's reading the same flight, manifest 40 times, looking for the thing you know is there, but hasn't shown itself yet." She ate a spoonful of soup. "And then one day," she said, "it shows itself." That was October. The thing had not shown itself yet. Demarcus worked the financial architecture. It was, he told Dara with what she had come to recognize as his version of enthusiasm, a slight increase in speaking pace and a tendency to draw diagrams on whatever paper was nearby, genuinely impressive in its construction. Stratus Meridian Holdings, LLC, was registered in Delaware, as so many things were, in February 2022. Its registered agent was a law firm that served as registered agent for approximately 2,300 other entities, which was not unusual and was in fact specifically designed not to be unusual. Stratus Meridian held one asset of record, a fractional ownership interest in a Gulfstream G700 shared with 2 other holding companies. Those 2 other companies were registered in the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands, respectively. The beneficial ownership disclosure requirements in both jurisdictions were, to put it gently, not aggressive. Marcus had spent 3 weeks unspooling the ownership chain. He had filled 11 pages of a legal pad. Dara had noted the number with a quiet appreciation, with company names, registration dates, nominee director names, and connecting lines that eventually began to resemble, as he described it to her, a fishing net made by someone who really did not want any fish to be found. At the center of the net, emerging slowly and reluctantly from behind 7 layers of corporate structure, was a beneficial ownership trail that led to a financial services entity in the Cayman Islands, whose single largest institutional investor held a position also held through a different vehicle entirely, and by a private family trust, whose beneficiary documentation listed an individual whose name Marcus circled 3 times on his legal pad and then sat staring at for a while. He called Dara. "I've got a thread," he said. "Pull it," she said. He pulled it for 6 more weeks. The flight logs were where the picture began to develop real shape. 41 flights over 16 months. Dara had assigned an analyst named Keisha, 27 years old and frighteningly sharp, to cross-reference every tail number variation against FAA records, CBP arrival notifications, and international aviation databases that Greg Tolliver, the quiet National Security Division liaison who had joined the team in October and communicated primarily through careful silences and the occasional devastating single sentence, had arranged access to through channels Dara did not ask him to explain. 14 flights stood out. Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, the preferred arrival point for private aviation clients who wanted proximity to Manhattan without the visibility of JFK or Newark. Dallas Love Field, Dulles International, a private airfield outside Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, that was technically affiliated with a royal family hospitality entity. An airfield near Abu Dhabi. One flight in March 2024 that had made a stop of 2 hours and 17 minutes at an airfield outside Ankara, Turkey, and before continuing to a private strip in southern Germany. The customs declarations for these flights, when they existed at all, listed cargo as personal effects, business documentation, or, in 4 cases, the ones that made Keisha look up from her screen with very wide eyes. Nothing. No declaration. No manifest entry for cargo. Technically, a violation of CBP protocols. Not unusual enough, on its own, to constitute more than a procedural flag. The world of ultra-wealthy private aviation operated in a customs environment that was, relative to commercial travel, extraordinarily accommodating of discretion. But it was Priya's photograph that kept bringing them back. Howard Beale had not yet entered the story. But his discipline had, because Marcus had contacted a forensic document imaging specialist through the Bureau's Technical Services Division and asked, quietly and without providing context, for an enhancement analysis of a single low-resolution cargo hold photograph. The report came back on a Thursday in November. It was 4 pages long and written in the careful, hedge-everything language of someone who understood they were being asked to testify to something with incomplete data. But the conclusion section, stripped of its qualifications, said this: the visible portion of the document header in the upper left corner of the open case was consistent, at a confidence level of approximately 73%, with formatting used in classified federal communications at the TS/SCI level. 73% was not certainty. Dara knew that. But it was enough. She called Greg Tolliver into her office and closed the door, and showed him the report. He read it without expression. He did most things without expression. And then he looked up at her. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Okay," she said. "Not from this building," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said again. He was gone for 2 days. When he came back, he sat down across from Dara's desk and folded his hands on the table in front of him the way a man does when he is organizing difficult information into speakable sentences. "At least 2 of the document sets visible in the photograph," he said, "correspond to formatting used by Doja Internal Communications, designated at the TS/SCI level." He said it once. He did not repeat it. He did not elaborate immediately. Dara sat with it for a moment. Outside the window, the November sky over Washington was the particular flat gray of a city that has seen too much and learned to keep its face neutral about it. Top secret. Sensitive compartmented information. Documents that were not permitted to leave secure facilities. Documents that had no legal basis for existing in a custom luggage case on a private jet, with 3 different registered identities, making unexplained stops near foreign governments. "Greg," she said quietly, "how confident are you?" He held her gaze. "Confident enough that I made those calls from outside this building," he said. That was the most she had ever heard him say about his own certainty. Coming from Greg Tolliver, it was the equivalent of anyone else pounding the table. She nodded. She picked up her phone. She called Celeste Brambauer. And Celeste was the assistant U.S. attorney who had been brought into the circle in November, the last addition to the 9-person team, chosen because she had a quality that Dara considered rarer than intelligence or work ethic or legal knowledge. Though Celeste had all 3 of those too. She had judgment. The specific kind of judgment that knew the difference between what you could prove and what you could pursue, and that understood those were not always the same thing, and that confusing them was how good cases fell apart. She had spent 6 days drafting the warrant application. She had written it and rewritten it, and on the 4th day called Dara at 11 p.m. and said, "I need you to walk me through the Teterboro flight again from the beginning." And Dara had done it without complaint, standing in her kitchen in her socks. Because Celeste asking the question a 5th time meant Celeste was making it airtight. On the morning of February 12th, 2025, 7 months, 1 week, and 4 days after Priya Venkataraman had pressed submit on her 11 pages at 2:17 a.m., a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia read the warrant application in its entirety, asked 2 clarifying questions, and signed it. Dara received the confirmation at 10:43 a.m. She sat at her desk and held it, not the physical document, which existed only digitally at that point, but the idea of it. The 7 months of spreadsheets and cold soup and 3 a.m. phone calls and doors that closed in their faces and threads that went nowhere before finally going somewhere. The weight of being 9 people carrying something this size for this long without letting it spill. Yeah, she thought about Priya, a 29-year-old woman in a parking lot in Austin, hands shaking, typing 11 pages because her instincts had told her something she couldn't unknow. She thought about her father. She thought about Douglas Hale leaving a courthouse in a suit that cost more than his fine. She picked up her phone and sent a single message to 8 people. It contained 4 words. "We move Thursday night." In his office, 2 floors down, Marcus Heilbrunn read the message, set his phone face down on his desk, and opened a fresh legal pad to the first page. He wrote nothing on it yet. He just looked at it, clean and blank and waiting, the way you look at something before everything changes. Thursday came the way important days always do. Ordinary on the outside, carrying everything on the inside. Dara woke at 5:30 a.m. without an alarm. She lay in the dark for a few minutes listening to Thomas breathe beside her, that slow and steady sound that had been the background music of her most difficult nights for 11 years. She did not wake him. She got up quietly, showered, dressed in the dark, and went downstairs to the kitchen where she stood at the counter and drank a glass of water and looked out the window at the pre-dawn street. Alexandria, Virginia, at 5:30 in the morning was very still. A neighbor's porch light was on. A car sat frosted at the curb. A single street lamp threw a circle of amber light onto the empty sidewalk below it. She thought about nothing specific. She had learned to do this, to hold the hours before a major operation in a kind of deliberate emptiness. And because the alternative was to let the mind run through every variable and outcome until it exhausted itself before the day even began. There would be time for thinking. The day would demand it. For now, she just stood at the window and breathed and watched the street be still. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:15. He was wearing the gray sweatshirt he always wore on weekend mornings, even though this was a Thursday, which told her he had set an alarm for this. He had not told her he was going to do that. He just had. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He didn't tell her to be careful. He had been married to her long enough to know that neither of those things was what she needed. He filled the kettle and put it on, and got 2 mugs down from the cabinet. He made her tea. She never drank coffee before operations, on a personal superstition she had never examined too closely, and set it in front of her. Then he sat down across the table and just was there. She drank her tea. He drank his coffee. The kitchen was warm. "Thank you," she said when she stood up to leave. He nodded. He looked at her the way her father had looked at her in that graduation photograph, like someone trying to memorize a moment. She picked up her bag and her keys and walked out into the cold February morning. The FBI's Dallas field office sat on North Stemmons Freeway, a functional building that made no claims about itself beyond competence. Dara had flown in Wednesday evening on a bureau flight and spent the night in a hotel 6 minutes away. Marcus had arrived separately, as had Keisha and Greg Tolliver. Celeste Brambauer was on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's office in Virginia until 11 p.m., and then went to sleep with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that rest before a critical day was not a luxury, but a professional obligation. They convened at 11 p.m. Thursday in a secured conference room at the Dallas field office, 22 agents in total. Dara stood at the front and looked at them, a room full of people who had been briefed on their specific roles, and nothing beyond their specific roles, which was standard procedure and also, in this particular case, an emotional experience she had not entirely anticipated. 22 people, each of them carrying a piece of this, none of them carrying all of it. She had written her briefing notes 3 times and ultimately delivered it without them. Because when she sat down to rehearse it, one final time, she realized she didn't need the notes. She had been living inside this case for 7 months. It was not information she was recalling. It was a place she had been living. She told them what they needed to know: warrant parameters, search boundaries, chain of custody protocols for any materials recovered, the specific location of the cargo hold access panel on the Gulf Stream G700. The fact that the 2 crew members, a pilot named in the warrant who had been quietly notified and had cooperated without incident, were currently off the aircraft and would remain so. She told them that whatever they found, or didn't find tonight, they were to treat every item with absolute precision. No shortcuts. No assumptions. Every single thing logged, photographed, and when bagged before it was touched a second time. This warrant was built over 7 months, she said. Every page of it is airtight. What we do tonight either honors that work or it doesn't. I expect it to honor it. Nobody in the room looked away from her. Good, she thought. The convoy left at 2:15 a.m., 12 black SUVs in a formation that was professional enough to be invisible, not clustered, not trailing each other too closely, moving through the sparse late-night Dallas traffic like ordinary vehicles that happened to be going the same direction. No sirens, no lights. The kind of restraint that comes from understanding that what you are doing is significant enough not to announce. Dallas Love Field sat quiet and mostly dark at this hour. The commercial terminals were shut down until the first morning flights. The private aviation section, a different world from the main terminal, separated by a service road and a particular quality of silence that money bought, had its usual overnight skeleton. A single operations desk staffed by a young man named Tyler, who had been spoken to earlier in the day by a federal officer and had since been sitting very quietly at his desk, pretending to read a magazine. He buzzed them through without a word. The tarmac stretched out ahead, flat, wide, lit at intervals by the amber ground lights that made the night feel like the inside of something. The fog had come in off the Trinity River lowlands and softened the edges of everything, turning the parked jets into pale shapes, turning the distance into gray nothing. At the far end, lit by a single overhead light that caught the cream of its exterior and turned it almost white against the dark, sat the Gulfstream G700. Dara had seen photographs of it. She had looked at its tail number in documents so many times, the digits had burned themselves into the back of her mind. But seeing it in person, in the cold and fog at 2:30 in the morning, was different in a way she had not prepared for. It was just an object. Metal and composite material and engineering and money. It had no expression, no awareness, no understanding of what was about to happen to it. And yet she stood 10 feet from the air stairs and felt the full weight of 7 months pressing against the inside of her chest. Marcus stopped beside her. He looked at the jet for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Oh, Howard's team is already at the cargo access." Howard Beale had arrived 20 minutes earlier in a separate vehicle, as arranged. He was 61 years old and had been doing forensic evidence cataloging for the Bureau since before Dara was in high school. He was a small, economical man who wore the same style of Navy windbreaker in every season and carried a cataloging kit that he had assembled personally over 30 years and which he referred to, without irony, as his go bag. He had cataloged evidence from drug seizures, art theft recoveries, financial fraud operations, and one case involving a senator that Dara was still not permitted to discuss at any dinner table anywhere. He had, in Dara's experience, never once reacted to anything he found. She had seen him catalog items that had made younger agents leave the room, and Howard Beale had simply logged them, bagged them, tagged them, and moved to the next item with the serene professionalism of a man who had made a lifelong peace with being the person who saw what other people couldn't handle seeing. This was why she had wanted him tonight. She climbed the air stairs. Marcus was right behind her. The interior of the G700 received them in silence. Cream leather. Dark wood. The faint, expensive smell of cedar, and something that might have been a custom fragrance diffused through the ventilation system. The kind of detail that cost more than most people's monthly rent and existed only to communicate wordlessly that the person who owned this space inhabited a different category of existence than whoever was visiting it. Dara had been in expensive spaces before. Private planes, yachts, penthouses with views that went on forever. She had learned not to let them impress her or intimidate her, because both impressment and intimidation were tools those spaces were specifically designed to deploy, and she had no interest in being managed by a room. She swept the interior with Marcus, methodical, careful, thorough. The sleeping area, the conference table, the overhead storage, every compartment opened, examined, documented. 2 agents worked behind them, photographing everything before it was touched. Nothing extraordinary in the cabin. Personal items consistent with extended travel. A blazer hung near the sleeping area. A laptop bag, logged and sealed for separate processing. A leather portfolio with a monogram she recognized. A half-finished bottle of still water in a side holder, which she found, for reasons she couldn't explain, the most humanizing detail in the entire aircraft. She came back down the air stairs. The cargo hold was accessed from the starboard side of the aircraft. a panel that one of the ground crew had opened before the convoy arrived as part of the warrant compliance process. 4 agents were positioned around it. The hold's interior lighting had been supplemented with 2 portable forensic lights that Howard Beale had arranged, filling the space with a clean white illumination that left nowhere for shadows to hide. Howard was crouching just inside the hold entrance, perfectly still, his flashlight on, his blue-gloved hands resting on his knees. He was not moving. He had been in position for 11 minutes, and according to the agent standing nearest to him, and in those 11 minutes he had not spoken, had not reached for his cataloging kit, had not done any of the things that Howard Beale did automatically and immediately upon approaching evidence. He was just looking. Dara climbed up into the cargo hold and crouched beside him. The 5 cases were exactly where Priya had described them. Matte black, custom-built, positioned in the aft section, secured with a single strap the way a professional packer would leave them. Neat and deliberate, and completely ordinary-looking if you did not know what you were looking at. The combination locks had already been cut, pursuant to the warrant. The first case was open. Howard was looking at what was inside it. Dara looked too. The portable forensic light fell across the contents without mercy. A clean white illumination. No shadows, no ambiguity. Just what was there, exactly as it was, asking to be seen. She looked for a long moment. Then she understood why Howard hadn't moved. She straightened up slowly. The cold air of the cargo hold sat on her face. Somewhere across the tarmac, a jet engine was cycling up for an early morning departure from the commercial side of the field. A sound so ordinary and distant that it seemed to belong to a completely different world. "Howard," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. "What is it?" He looked up at her. In the white forensic light, his face was stripped of shadow, every line and year of it visible. And what she saw there was not fear and not excitement, and not the professional neutrality she had come to think of as his permanent expression. It was something quieter than all of those things, something that looked almost like awe. The expression of a man who had spent 30 years believing he had seen everything and had just discovered he was wrong. "You need to see all 5, he said. She nodded. He reached for his cataloging kit. He began. Howard Beale worked the way he always worked, methodically, silently, without hurry and without waste. Each case was opened in sequence. Each item was photographed in place before it was touched. Each document set was logged by physical description before anyone attempted to read it. Howard's hands moved with the practiced steadiness of a man who understood that evidence, handled incorrectly even once, he could unravel everything that came before it. 7 months of spreadsheets and flight logs and cold soup and signed warrants reduced to nothing by a single broken protocol. Nobody rushed him. Nobody spoke unless Howard spoke first. The cargo hold held its silence the way the inside of a church holds silence. Not empty, but weighted, full of something that asked you to be careful with yourself. Dara stood to the side and watched, and kept her breathing even. The first case held documents, stacked in neat bundles, separated by color-coded dividers, the kind of organizational system used by people who handled large volumes of sensitive material regularly and needed to locate specific items quickly. So the paper stock was heavier than standard, a specific weight used in classified federal printing that Dara recognized because Greg Tolliver had shown her a sample 3 months earlier, specifically so she would recognize it if she saw it. She recognized it. Howard photographed each bundle from 3 angles before lifting it. He did not read the contents. That was not his role. His role was to establish the chain of custody with absolute precision so that whatever these documents were No defense attorney in any subsequent proceeding could stand up and question how they had been handled from the moment they were found. He was very good at his role. The second case, more documents. Different dividers. These were red, where the first set had been blue. Howard noted the color distinction in his log without commentary. Dara noted it too. A color coding suggested organizational intentionality. Someone had sorted these materials into categories. Someone had been using them regularly enough that retrieval speed mattered. The third case was heavier than the first two. Howard noted the weight in his log. When he opened it, Dara saw why. The documents inside were bound, not loose. Thick binders with metal spines, the kind that suggested permanence rather than transit. These were not documents being transported temporarily. They were documents being kept. She kept her face neutral. The fourth case contained a mix, some loose documents, some bound, and along one interior wall, a series of small sealed envelopes that Howard logged individually. 14 of them, each one numbered in sequence with a black marker in handwriting that was precise and small. Howard bagged each envelope separately without opening them. The contents would be processed in a secure facility by people with the appropriate clearances. It was the fifth case that stopped everything. Howard lifted the lid and looked inside and went still again. The same stillness Dara had found when she arrived at the hold. The stillness that had told her something was wrong with the ordinary picture before she had even seen what he was looking at. She moved closer. The fifth case contained documents like the others, but those were not what Howard was looking at. Resting in a foam-lined compartment on the interior left wall of the case, custom-cut foam, Dara noted, formed precisely around the object's shape, which meant it had been placed there deliberately and repeatedly, and the case had been built to carry it, was a device. And small, roughly the size of a hardcover novel, maybe slightly thicker. Matte black casing, the same visual language as the luggage itself. A deliberate aesthetic consistency that suggested whoever had commissioned these items had thought carefully about how they would look together. No brand marking visible on any exterior surface. No serial number. 2 ports on one end. One standard USB-C, and one that Dara stared at for a long moment before accepting that she did not recognize it. It was not a port she had seen before. Not in consumer electronics, not in bureau equipment, not in any of the government-issue technology she had encountered in 11 years. The foam around it was undisturbed, or the device sat in its cutout, with the settled stillness of something that had been placed there many times and always returned to exactly this position. Howard did not touch it. He photographed it from 6 angles. He logged it as item number 6. He noted the custom foam housing. He noted the unidentified port. He sealed the entire case, device still inside, foam still undisturbed, and tagged it with a red evidence marker, which in Howard's personal cataloging system, Dara knew, meant, "This one is different." He had used a red marker twice in 30 years. The materials were transported in 2 separate convoys. Cases 1 through 4 and their contents went in the first convoy to a secure FBI facility in the Dallas field office where a team of cleared analysts was already waiting. And the 5th case, item number 6, still nestled in its foam, went in the second convoy with 2 agents whose names Dara had personally selected and who had been told only that the item required maximum care and minimum handling. Neither agent asked what it was. They were experienced enough to understand that the question was not theirs to ask yet. Dara rode in the first convoy. She sat in the back seat and watched Dallas move past the tinted windows, the city's nighttime geography of highways and lights, and the flat, wide darkness between developments that Texas always seemed to have more of. than other places. She was not seeing the city. She was seeing the inside of the cargo hold. The 5 cases. Howard's stillness. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, riding in a vehicle ahead of hers. "How are you doing?" The message read. She considered the question honestly. "Ask me in 12 hours, she typed back. He sent back a single thumbs up, which from Marcus was practically an emotional speech. The secure facility at the Dallas field office had been prepared in advance. A cleared room, access restricted to 9 named individuals, 2 forensic document examiners already on site who had been flown in from Quantico the previous afternoon, without being told specifically what they would be examining. They had been told only that the materials were classified, that their clearances were sufficient, and that they were to contact no one outside the room until Dara personally cleared them to do so. They began at 4:20 a.m. and worked through the night without stopping. By 6 a.m., the lead examiner, a composed woman named Dr. Eusandra Obi, who had been examining federal documents for 22 years and whose professional vocabulary did not typically include the word extraordinary, came to find Dara in the hallway outside the secured room where Dara had been standing with a cup of vending machine coffee that she was not drinking. Dr. Obi looked at her with an expression that Dara filed immediately in the same category as Howard's stillness and Marcus's second okay. "The documents are real," Dr. Obi said. "All of them. Paper stock, watermarks, security fiber embedment, print rendering, everything is consistent with authentic TS/SCI level federal communications. We've run 3 separate verification protocols." She paused. "Agent Okonkwo, there are 847 pages across the 4 cases." Dara had been expecting something like this. Or she had built 7 months towards something like this. She had signed her name to a warrant application that argued for something like this. She was still not entirely prepared for the feeling of hearing it confirmed out loud in a fluorescent-lit hallway in Dallas at 6 a.m. by a woman whose 22 years of professional composure were visibly working hard to stay in place. "Categories?" Dara asked. Dr. Obi had a notepad. She consulted it. "Intelligence assessments. We've flagged at least 3 that appear to pertain to active operations, though full content analysis will require the appropriate subject matter specialists. DOGE internal operational documents, access logs, personnel files for federal agency personnel, financial authorization chains." So there's a subset we've set aside for Greg Tolliver specifically, technical material that's outside our lane. She glanced at her notepad again. "And 14 sealed envelopes that we have not opened and are recommending go directly to the National Security Division." Dara nodded at each item. She was building the picture in her mind, adding these pieces to everything that had come before, watching the shape of it become clearer and more serious with each addition. "The device," she said. "Item number 6. Dr. Obi's composure did something subtle, a slight tightening, a fractional hesitation. "That's not with us," she said. "That went to a separate facility last night. I was told this morning that 2 outside consultants have been brought in under NDA." She paused again. "See, I was not told who the consultants are." "That's correct," Dara said. Dr. Obi looked at her for a moment, a woman who had spent 22 years seeing classified material, applying her expertise to documents that represented the government's most sensitive work. Standing in a hallway in Dallas at 6 a.m., with something on her face that might, if you were being precise about it, have been called unease. "Agent Okonkwo," she said carefully. "In 22 years, I have examined a great many things in this capacity." "I know," Dara said. "I have not," Dr. Obi said, "examined anything quite like what is in that room." She said it simply, without drama, The way people say the truest things without needing to dress them up, because the thing itself is already enough. Dara looked at the closed door of the secured room. 847 pages, 14 sealed envelopes, a device in a foam-lined case that nobody had built a name for yet. She thought about Priya in a parking lot in Austin, hands shaking over a steering wheel, deciding to type 11 pages because she could not live with the alternative. She thought about a photograph, a cracked case, a header format that a forensic imaging report had called consistent with TS/SCI communications at 73% confidence. 73% had become 100. She set her untouched coffee down on the hallway floor. She pushed open the door to the secured room and went back to work. The leak happened the way leaks always happened in Washington. Not with a press conference, not with a formal statement, so not with any of the official machinery that existed specifically to manage the controlled release of information to a public that had a right to it. It happened the way water finds a crack in concrete, quietly, inevitably, through the smallest available opening, following the path that gravity and pressure made obvious. By 8 a.m. on February 14th, 3 news organizations had received calls from separate sources, none of whom were on Dara's team, none of whom she could immediately identify, all of whom used the careful, distancing language of people who understood exactly what they were doing, describing an FBI action at Dallas Love Field overnight. The details were vague in the specific way that early leaks are vague, accurate in outline, wrong in specifics. She shaped more by what the source wanted to communicate than by what had actually happened. Reuters ran the first item at 8:23 a.m., 11 sentences, an authorized law enforcement action at a private aviation facility in Dallas, a reference to a tip from a private aviation employee. No names, no details about what had been found. The kind of story that was simultaneously everything and nothing, enough to ignite the atmosphere, not enough to illuminate what was actually burning. CNN followed at 8:41 with a slightly longer piece that added the detail, sourced anonymously, that the action had involved a significant private aircraft. The New York Times had a piece online by 9:05 that was careful and measured and contained, buried in the 14th paragraph. A single sentence that made Dara's stomach tighten when her analyst Keisha texted it to her verbatim. The aircraft in question is understood to have connections to individuals operating at the highest levels of the current administration. 14 paragraphs in, carefully worded, plausibly deniable in its vagueness. It didn't matter. 14 paragraphs in was still in. The sentence existed now in the public record, and the public record, once written, did not unwrite itself. Dara read it, standing in the secure facility hallway, phone in hand, 3 hours of sleep behind her, and a full day of work ahead of her. She forwarded it to Celeste Brambauer with no message. Celeste responded in 40 seconds with 4 words. I saw it. Keep working. Dara kept working. At 9:47 a.m., Elon Musk posted on X. But the post was 6 words and a period. The deep state isn't pretending anymore. He had written it with the particular economy of someone who understood that brevity, on his platform, was its own form of amplification. That 6 words from his account, seen by 200 million followers, carried more atmospheric charge than 600 words from anyone else. He did not mention the FBI. He did not mention Dallas. He did not mention a jet, or a warrant, or a cargo hold. He did not need to. The post received 2.1 million likes in the first hour. The replies beneath it formed their own ecosystem instantly. A churning, self-generating world of theories and certainties and counter-theories and rage and mockery, and the particular brand of digital solidarity that forms when large numbers of people feel that the thing they believe in is under attack. Some said the FBI had planted everything. Some said Doge was the real target, that the raid was retaliation for the agency cuts that had been generating headlines since January. A smaller group, quieter and more methodical in their posts, had already connected the Reuters mention of a private aviation employee to the industry and geography, and were narrowing toward Priya Venkataraman with a focus that made Dara, when she saw it flagged by Keisha 40 minutes later, feel something cold move through her chest. She called the witness security coordinator immediately. Patricia answered on the first ring. "I know," Patricia said, before Dara could speak. "I'm already with her." Priya was in a hotel room in a city she had agreed not to name, watching the television with her knees pulled to her chest and her phone turned face down on the bed beside her. And she was not crying. She had moved past crying sometime in the previous hour into something quieter and more total. A kind of full-body stillness that was not calm, but was what came after calm ran out. She had watched Elon Musk's face appear on 3 separate cable news panels in the space of 90 minutes. She had watched politicians she recognized and politicians she didn't recognize argue about things they clearly did not have the full information to argue about. Or she had watched a commentator on a channel she did not usually watch refer to the so-called whistleblower, those words specifically, so-called, with the contempt loaded into the hyphen, and felt the phrase land somewhere in her chest, like something physical. Patricia sat in the chair by the window. She had brought food that Priya had not touched. She did not push the food. She did not offer reassurances that she couldn't back up. She simply stayed, which was its own kind of language. The television showed a live shot of Dallas Love Field in the daylight. The same tarmac, the same private aviation terminal, looking entirely ordinary under the February sun. A reporter stood in front of it in a good coat, saying careful words about an ongoing federal investigation. Priya looked at the screen. She had stood on that tarmac. She had walked across it at odd hours carrying clipboards and manifests and the specific professional neutrality that her job required. She had been good at her job. She had noticed the things she noticed because she was good at it. She wondered, not for the first time, whether being good at something could cost you everything. "Priya," Patricia said from the chair. Priya looked at her. "You saw what you saw," Patricia said, simply, without decoration. It was almost exactly what Priya had said to herself in the bathroom mirror of a previous hotel, in the early days when she was still rehearsing her own conviction to make sure it held. Hearing it from someone else made it feel different. Heavier in one way, lighter in another. She turned back to the television. Outside the hotel window, the city moved through its ordinary Friday, are entirely unaware of the woman in the 4th-floor room who had started all of this with 11 pages and a photograph and the specific, terrifying courage of someone who understood exactly what they were giving up when they told the truth. Washington, D.C. had a particular relationship with silence. It was a city built on words, speeches and testimony and press releases and the constant, churning machinery of public language that never fully stopped. Not on weekends, not on holidays, not even in the deep middle of the night when the buildings were dark and the streets were empty and the whole apparatus appeared to be resting. Underneath the quiet, there was always the hum of something being said, something being prepared to be said, something being carefully unsaid. So when the FBI issued its single statement on the afternoon of February 14th, acknowledging only an authorized law enforcement action consistent with a valid federal warrant, and declining all further comment, and then went completely, professionally, impenetrably silent. The silence itself became a form of communication. People who knew how to listen to Washington listened. The first signal came on February 16th, 2 days after the raid. A senior official at the Department of Government Efficiency, a man whose name appeared on internal organizational charts, but who had maintained a profile so low in public reporting that most journalists covering Doge had never written his name, submitted a letter requesting indefinite administrative leave. The letter cited personal reasons. It was 2 sentences long. And the second signal came the following morning. Another Doge official, this one a woman who had been publicly named in a Wall Street Journal profile about the agency restructuring efforts in January, filed a similar request. Same language. Personal reasons. 2 sentences. By the end of February 17th, 4 senior Doge officials had filed leave requests. Dara's analyst, Keisha, had been tracking the organizational charts since November, and she flagged each departure within hours, adding them to a running document she had titled, with the dry humor that long investigations seem to cultivate in careful people, the quieting. The third signal was the attorneys. 2 of the 4 officials who had filed leave requests retained the same defense lawyer within 48 hours of each other. And his name was Sterling Krause, a Washington attorney with silver hair and a reputation built over 30 years of representing people whose legal problems existed at the precise intersection of government power and criminal exposure. He was expensive, selective, and had not taken a new client in 18 months. He took 2 in 48 hours. Marcus noted this in his running file and called Dara immediately. "Sterling Krause," he said. "I saw it," she said. "He doesn't take cases he can't win," Marcus said. "I know." "Which means he thinks there's something to work with." "Or," Dara said, "it means his clients told him enough that he understands the stakes, and he's the only person they trust to navigate them." A pause. "Either way," Marcus said. "Either way," she agreed. The fourth signal was the quietest, and in some ways the most telling. A mid-level employee at the National Security Council, a policy analyst who had been in the position for 14 months and whose work had overlapped, according to the access logs that were now part of the evidence inventory from the cargo hold, with at least 3 of the document categories recovered from the first 4 cases, submitted a request for a personnel transfer to a posting in Brussels. The request had been filed on February 15th, the morning after the raid. Greg Tolliver brought this to Dara's attention on February 18th without comment, which was how Greg Tolliver communicated that something required immediate and serious attention. He set a single printed page on her desk, the transfer request, time-stamped, and looked at her. She looked at it. February 15th, she said. He nodded. "Before the Reuters piece ran," she said. "Yes," he said. That one word carrying the full weight of what it meant, that whoever had filed that transfer request had known about the raid before the public did, had known quickly enough to begin moving by the following morning, had known through a channel that was not the news. Dara sat with this for a moment. "The aircraft," she said. Greg set a second page on her desk. A flight manifest. A Cessna citation registered to a holding company with a different name, but a beneficial ownership trail that Marcus had already connected, in a preliminary analysis that he had sent her at 11 p.m. the previous night, to Stratus Meridian Holdings through 2 intermediate entities. The citation had departed Teterboro Airport on February 15th at 6:14 a.m. under a general aviation exemption that required minimal pre-filing. Its destination was listed as a private airfield in southern France. By the time anyone had looked at the manifest carefully, the aircraft had already landed and departed its listed destination, and was, according to the last transponder ping before it apparently switched off, somewhere over the eastern Mediterranean. The transponder had not come back on. Dara read the manifest twice. She set it down carefully, aligned with the edge of her desk the way she aligned everything, and looked at the coffee stain on the conference table that had survived years of industrial cleaning, and thought about permanence and impermanence, and the things that left marks, and the things that tried very hard not to. "We need to move faster," she said. Greg nodded once, so he picked up his phone and walked out of the room. That evening, Dara came home later than usual. Later than Thomas had expected. She could tell by the way the kitchen light was on, but the rest of the house was dark, meaning he had waited up and then gone to bed and left the light for her. She sat at the kitchen table alone. She had not eaten since noon. She did not eat now. She sat with the running file in her head. The leave requests, Sterling Krause, the Brussels transfer, the citation with the dead transponder over the Eastern Mediterranean, and felt the shape of the case changing. For 7 months, it had been a picture she was assembling piece by piece in a controlled and methodical way, adding to it carefully, building toward a moment of sufficient completeness that the law could act on it. Now the picture was moving, and the pieces were not staying still. People who were connected to what was in those 5 cases had started making decisions. Fast, early morning decisions, cover your position decisions. And that meant the picture was no longer only in her hands. She heard Thomas on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in the gray sweatshirt, hair slightly flattened from the pillow, and looked at her the way he always looked at her when she came home carrying something too large to put down. He sat down across the table without being asked. She looked at him across the kitchen in the warm yellow light and thought about her father and Douglas Hale and a courtroom in Columbus and a suit that cost more than a fine. She thought about Priya in a hotel room with the television on, watching her own courage become someone else's news cycle. She thought about Howard Beale in a cargo hold, going still. She thought about what was inside case number 5, what was in the foam cutout, what item number 6 was, and what it meant, and why 2 outside consultants with clearances that made Greg Tolliver look like a library card holder had been brought in under ND, as so severe that one of them would later describe the signing as the most frightening document she had ever held. 8 days had passed since the raid. The consultants were still working. The silence from that facility was the loudest silence of all. Thomas reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the gesture did not already say more precisely. Outside, Alexandria was quiet and dark and ordinary, going about the business of being a city that did not know what was happening 4 floors underground in a secured facility whose location was not listed on any public record. The silence held everything. For now. Patricia arrived at the hotel room on the morning of February 22nd with 2 bags of Thai food and a manila folder, and the careful, unhurried manner of someone who had learned that the way you entered a room mattered as much as what you said once you were inside it. She set the food on the small table by the window without making it a thing. Green curry. Pad CU. A container of jasmine rice with a lid that was already slightly loose, leaking fragrant steam into the room. She arranged it with the quiet efficiency of a woman who understood that feeding someone was sometimes the only form of care they could actually receive. Where Priya was sitting on the bed, with her back against the headboard and her legs crossed, and the television on with the sound turned low. She had been in this hotel for 8 days. She knew the water pressure in the shower and the exact pitch of the ice machine down the hall, and the way the afternoon light moved across the carpet from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. in a slow amber rectangle that she had watched more times than she could count. She had been sleeping in fragments, eating irregularly, calling her mother on Sundays and saying everything was fine, in a voice she was getting better at making convincing. She had been thinking about her father. Not about anything specific he had said or done. Just about him as a fact. The fact of him, and the way he had lived his life with a particular straightforwardness that she had taken for granted when she was young and had come in her adult years to understand was actually a form of courage. He had been a straightforward man in situations that rewarded complexity and deflection and strategic vagueness, and he had simply refused to be any other way. She had not always understood what that cost him. She understood it now. Patricia sat down in the chair by the window. Her chair, the one she always took, positioned so she could see both Priya and the door, which Priya had noticed on the first day and had found, in its quiet protectiveness, unexpectedly moving. She opened the manila folder. "There's going to be a grand jury," Patricia said. She delivered it simply, without preamble or softening. Patricia had learned, Priya suspected, that Priya did not want softening. She wanted the thing itself, stated plainly, so she could look at it directly and decide what she thought about it. "They want to know if you'd be willing to testify." Priya looked at the folder. She did not look at it the way you look at something you are surprised by. She looked at it the way you look at something you have known was coming and have been privately preparing for without admitting to yourself that you were preparing. Grand jury testimony. Her name in a federal record. The full, public, permanent reality of having been the person who started this, not hinted at in a careful Reuters sentence anymore, not referred to obliquely as a private aviation employee, but named, present, are accountable to what she had seen and what she had done about it in the way that the law required people to be accountable when they stepped into its processes. She thought about the cracked case, the edge of what she had seen in the cargo hold on that Thursday evening in May, the header format, the specific weight of the paper, the way her brain had processed it and understood it, and then immediately, desperately, tried to un-understand it. 4 weeks of trying. 4 weeks of waking up at 3 a.m. and staring at the ceiling and running through alternative explanations until she ran out of alternatives. She thought about the email that had been recalled 20 minutes after it was sent. Please disregard and delete. Sent in error. She had deleted it. She had also kept the screenshot, though without fully knowing why, or perhaps knowing exactly why, and not yet being ready to admit it to herself. She thought about her mother in Plano, who called every Sunday, and whose voice contained, in its warmth and constancy, an entire theory of how a person should move through the world. She thought about Deja, her best friend, who could always make her laugh, who had texted 3 days ago simply, "I don't know exactly what's happening, but I know you. Whatever you decided, it was the right thing." She had read that text 11 times. She looked at Patricia. "Yes," she said. The word came out without trembling. She had expected it to tremble. It didn't. It came out the way her father's voice always came out when he had made up his mind about something, level and clear and finished, and the voice of a person who had already done the hard work of the decision and was now simply stating the result. Patricia wrote one word in her notepad. She did not make a production of it. She capped her pen and set the notepad on her knee and looked at Priya with an expression that was not congratulation, because this was not the kind of moment that congratulation fit, but something more specific and more honest than that. Recognition, maybe. The look of one person acknowledging another person's difficulty without flinching from it. "The food's getting cold," Patricia said. Priya looked at the Thai containers on the table, the jasmine rice still breathing steam, the green curry in its plastic tub, patient and warm and entirely indifferent to the weight of what had just been decided in this room. She uncrossed her legs and moved to the table. She ate. Outside the hotel window, the city was doing what cities did on Saturday mornings in February, moving slowly, bundled against the cold, going about the ordinary business of ordinary lives with no awareness of the woman on the fourth floor who had just agreed to stand in a federal building and say out loud, under oath, in the permanent record, what she had seen in a cargo hold in Dallas on a Thursday evening in May. The rain that had been threatening all morning finally arrived, soft and steady, the kind that didn't announce itself, that simply appeared and continued, patient as the truth. Priya ate her green curry. She did not look at the television. She did not need to anymore. The facility where item number 6 had been taken was not listed on any public record. It did not appear on federal building registries. It did not have a street address that corresponded to anything searchable. It existed, as Greg Tolliver had described it to Dara in the single sentence he devoted to its explanation, as a place that was operationally necessary and administratively invisible, which was the kind of language that told you everything and nothing simultaneously and was specifically designed to do both. What Dara knew was this: the device had arrived there on the morning of February 14th, escorted by 2 agents whose assignment ended the moment they handed it over. 2 outside consultants had been brought in that same day. The NDAs they signed before entering the facility were, according to the bureau attorney who drafted them, the most restrictive non-disclosure instruments he had written in 23 years of writing such things. He had told Dara this not as a complaint, but as information. The way a navigator tells a pilot about weather ahead, not to frighten, but because the person steering needed to know what was coming. 8 days had passed. Dara had received 3 updates in that time, each one shorter than the last, each one containing a variation of the same essential message. Still working. Will contact when complete. The brevity was not rudeness. It was the specific compression of people who were dealing with something that resisted easy summarization, and who understood that partial information in a case like this was more dangerous than no information at all. She had waited. So she was good at waiting. 11 years of financial investigations had made patience less a virtue and more a professional skill, like lock-picking or reading a balance sheet. You developed it because the alternative was making moves before you understood the board. And making moves before you understood the board was how cases fell apart, and guilty people walked out of courthouses in suits that cost more than their fines. She waited. On the evening of February 22nd. The same evening, Patricia sat in a hotel room chair and watched Priya Venkataraman eat green curry and make the bravest, quiet decision of her life. Dara's phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The number was blocked. She answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was a woman's, measured and precise. She's with the particular vocal quality of someone who had spent years communicating complex technical information to people who needed to understand it quickly and completely, and without the luxury of asking follow-up questions. She spoke the way surgeons spoke in operating rooms. No wasted words, no decorative language, every syllable carrying exactly its required weight and nothing more. She identified herself as Dr. F, not her real name, an agreed-upon designation for this communication, established in advance through the bureau attorney as part of the NDA protocol. "Agent Okonkwo," she said. "We know what it is." Dara was at her kitchen table. Thomas was asleep upstairs. The house held the specific silence of a late February night. The furnace cycling quietly, the old house settling into itself, on the street outside empty and still under the orange wash of the street lamp. She could see through the window above the sink. She stood up. not deliberately, not as a decision. Her body simply rose from the chair, the way bodies rise when something arrives that the sitting position is no longer adequate for. "Tell me," she said. Dr. F told her. It took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Dara knew the precise duration because she had been recording the call on a bureau-sanctioned device, a habit so ingrained after 11 years that she had activated it before answering, automatically, the way other people check the time. She would listen to those 4 minutes and 20 seconds many times in the days that followed. Each time she would find something new in them, a word she had processed differently on first hearing, or a technical specification that landed with greater weight on the third or fourth pass. A silence of 3 seconds near the end of Dr. F's explanation that Dara came to think of as the moment the full meaning had completed its transit from the doctor's understanding to her own. She did not move for the first 2 minutes of the explanation. She stood at her kitchen table with the phone pressed to her ear and listened with the complete, consuming attention she brought to the things that mattered most. In the second minute, she put her free hand flat on the kitchen table. Not for support, exactly. More the way you touch something solid when the ground beneath you is doing something unexpected. Reaching for the reality of a surface, a temperature, a thing that held its shape. The table was cool under her palm. The wood grain ran left to right in a pattern she had looked at 10,000 times without seeing. She saw it now. Dr. F's explanation moved through 3 phases. The first was physical, what the device was made of, how it was constructed, what its architecture suggested about its origin and purpose. The second was functional, what it did, how it did it, the mechanism by which it accomplished the thing it had been built to accomplish. The third was consequential, what it meant, in practical terms, that such a device existed and had been found, where it had been found, carried in the manner it had been carried, by the people who had been carrying it. It was in the third phase that Dara sat back down. Not deliberately. Her legs simply made the decision without consulting her. She sat in her kitchen chair and stared at the wall across from her. The wall with the small painting Thomas had bought at a farmer's market years ago. A watercolor of the Virginia countryside in autumn. Oranges and yellows, and a gray sky that she had always found calming. She did not find it calming right now. "Say the last part again," she said. Dr. F said it again. Same words, same precise surgical delivery. The repetition did not make it smaller. It made it larger. The way hearing a true thing twice confirms it past the point where you can reasonably doubt it, and forces you to simply accept that the world now contains this information, and you are one of the people who has to carry it. She thanked Dr. F. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the kitchen. Then she called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. She had known he would. Marcus Heilbrunn had been awake at 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday night, because Marcus Heilbrunn had been awake at 11:47 p.m. every night for the past 8 days, waiting for this call the same way she had been waiting for it, with the patient and wakeful tension of someone who understood that the last piece of a 7-month puzzle was still outstanding and that their job was not finished until it arrived. She could hear the quality of his alertness through the phone, the slight forward lean of it, the held breath of a man who had been sitting very still in a dark room, waiting for the thing he knew was coming. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was steady. She was grateful again for that. "The device, it's not a storage unit." A pause, short and complete. "Then, what is it?" he said. She told him what Dr. F had told her. Not all 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Just the essential architecture of it, the functional core, the thing that made everything else make sense in the worst possible way. She told him it was a key, a hardware-level master access key, a physical device that bypassed authentication infrastructure at the foundational level. Not hacking, not exploiting a vulnerability, not the kind of intrusion that left logs and traces and the digital footprints that cybersecurity systems were built to detect. Something more fundamental than any of that. Something that operated below the level where detection systems lived. Something that walked through the front door of any system it was introduced to because it carried, embedded in its architecture, it's an instruction that the system recognized as legitimate at a level deeper than the systems were designed to question. No passwords required, no credentials, no access logs generated, no trace of entry or exit. A ghost key. Built not to open one door, but to open every door. Every federal system. Treasury. Defense. The intelligence community's shared architecture. The communications infrastructure of agencies whose names did not appear in public budgets. Every door, every room, every drawer in the entire federal building. Not metaphorically, but literally, in the language of systems and access and the digital architecture that held the government's most sensitive operations together. All of it. She heard Marcus breathing on the other end of the line, the specific quality of his breath changing as the information arrived and assembled itself in his mind the way it had assembled in hers, piece by piece, implication by implication, until the full shape of it was visible, and the full shape of it was enormous. "Who built it?" he said. His voice was very quiet. The question was very quiet. It was the question that everything else had been leading toward. 7 months of spreadsheets and flight logs, and a photograph taken in 2 seconds in a cargo hold, and 847 pages of classified documents, and 14 sealed envelopes, and a foam-lined cutout built specifically for this specific object. All of it had been the path to this question. Dara looked at the watercolor on the wall, the autumn countryside, the gray sky. She told him the name Dr. F had spoken in the last 30 seconds of the call, and the name that was not a foreign government, the name that was not a rogue contractor, the name that existed at the very center of the web, not outside it, not at its edges, not in the shadows at its periphery, but at the absolute center, the place where all the threads met, the place that should have been the most trusted, the most protected, the most fundamentally impossible location for that name to appear. The silence that followed was the longest silence of the investigation. Longer than Howard Beale in the cargo hold. Longer than Dr. Obi in the hallway at 6 a.m. Longer than Marcus's second quiet okay on a Thursday morning in August, when Dara had first told him who the client was. This silence was different from all of those silences. Those silences had been the silence of people arriving at something difficult. And this silence was the silence of two people arriving at something that went beyond difficult into a category that did not have an adequate word. The silence of understanding that the thing you had been investigating for 7 months was larger than the investigation, larger than the warrant, larger than the cargo hold and the jet and the tarmac and the fog and all the careful, patient, costly work that had brought you to this moment. It was the silence of a door opening onto a room that was much, much bigger than the house. Marcus spoke first. His voice, when it came, was the same steady voice he always had. That was Marcus, the furnace cycling in a dark house, constant and reliable and warm. "Okay," he said. Just that. But this time, this third time, this final time, the word contained everything. All the weight of what they now knew, and all the distance still to travel. All the cost of what it was going to mean to carry this forward into the light where it needed to go, where Priya Venkataraman had started sending it on a night in Austin when she sat alone in a kitchen with a houseplant named Gerald, and typed 11 pages because she could not live inside the silence anymore. Dara looked at the watercolor. The autumn countryside held its colors. The gray sky held its weather. "Yeah," she said softly. She set the phone down on the table. Outside, Alexandria was still and dark and ordinary. Inside, the kitchen light burned on. And somewhere in a facility that did not exist on any public record, item number 6 sat in its foam-lined case, holding its secret with the patient. Absolute stillness of a thing that had always known it would eventually be found. That had been built, perhaps, by someone who understood that all keys, sooner or later, end up in the wrong hands. Or perhaps, in exactly the right ones. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. on the morning of March 11, 2025, was the kind of building that had absorbed so much history it had stopped being impressed by any of it. Its corridors had held the footsteps of senators and criminals and whistleblowers and liars, and the occasionally rare individual who was none of those things, and simply a person who had seen something true and had decided, at great personal cost, to say so in a room where it would be recorded permanently and irrevocably into the fabric of the public record. Priya Venkataraman walked through the security checkpoint at 8:43 a.m. She was wearing the navy blue blazer she had bought the afternoon before at a department store 2 blocks from her hotel. She had pressed it the previous night and hung it on the bathroom door and looked at it for a while before going to bed. This ordinary object, this simple professional garment, that felt in that moment like something more deliberate than clothing, like a decision made visible, like the outside of a person matching the inside for the first time in a long time. She had slept. Not well and not enough, but she had slept, which was more than she had managed the night before her first meeting with Dara's team. More than she had managed the night the Reuters piece ran. More than she had managed through most of the previous 7 months. Something had settled in her after the conversation with Patricia. Not peace, exactly. Not the absence of fear. Something more durable than either of those things. The specific internal steadiness that comes when a person stops fighting the direction they have already chosen and simply walks in it. She sat in a waiting room with pale walls and fluorescent lighting, and a plastic chair that was exactly as uncomfortable as institutional plastic chairs always were, and she waited to be called. Patricia sat beside her. She had brought 2 coffees from the place on the corner. She handed one to Priya without making it a moment. Priya wrapped both hands around the cup. She thought about the cargo hold, the cracked case. The 2 seconds she had stood there before, closing it and walking away with her face neutral and her heart in her throat and the knowledge sitting in her chest like something that had moved in and intended to stay. She thought about Gerald the houseplant, still inexplicably alive on the windowsill of her apartment on Oltorf Street, surviving without her through the particular quiet stubbornness of things that simply refused to give up. She thought about her father. Not the fact of him this time, but his voice, specifically. The way it sounded when he said her name. The warmth it carried that had nothing to do with the words around it. She thought about 11 pages typed at 2 a.m. and a submit button pressed in the dark, and the specific feeling of a decision becoming irreversible. The way a stone feels when it leaves your hand, already in the air, already committed to the direction of its falling. She had pressed submit. The stone had left her hand. Everything that had happened since was where the stone had landed. A door opened across the waiting room. A clerk appeared in the frame, young, efficient, holding a clipboard with the brisk neutrality of someone performing the 10,000th version of a routine task. "Ms. Venkataraman," the clerk said. Priya stood. She smoothed the front of the navy blazer with both hands. Once, a single composed motion, and picked up her coffee and walked toward the door. She did not look back at the waiting room. She did not look back at Patricia, who was watching her go with an expression that contained something warm and wordless and entirely sufficient. She walked through the door. Idara Okonkwo filed her full investigative report on March 15, 2025. It ran to 340 pages and represented the most significant case of her career. She has not spoken publicly about it. She continues to work in the FBI's Financial Crimes and National Security Division. The photograph of her father, Emmanuel, at her college graduation, the one where he is looking at her instead of the camera, sits in its corner of her desk, exactly where it has always been. Marcus Heilbrunn bought 3 new legal pads the week after the grand jury convened. He filled all of them. Celeste Brambauer was quietly promoted in April. She declined to comment on anything related to the investigation and has continued declining ever since. With the pleasant and absolute finality of a woman who has made a permanent peace with not being known for the most important work she has ever done. Greg Tolliver said nothing. He had never said much. He continued saying nothing, which was, for Greg Tolliver, essentially a form of eloquence. Howard Beale retired on April 30, 2025. There was a small gathering in a conference room at the Hoover Building. Cake, paper plates, the good-natured awkwardness of federal employees attempting festivity in a fluorescent-lit room. People said things about his 30 years of service. They said things about his precision and his professionalism and his extraordinary institutional memory. Nobody mentioned Dallas Love Field. Nobody mentioned item number 6. Howard ate his cake and shook hands and drove home in his Navy windbreaker and was, just as far as anyone who knew him could tell, exactly the same man he had always been. He never discussed that night with anyone. Not once. Not ever. Item number 6 is held in a secure facility whose location is classified at a level that does not appear in public budget documentation. The 2 consultants who identified it, Dr. F and her colleague, whose designation for that investigation was simply Dr. K, returned to their respective positions under the terms of their NDAs. Neither has spoken about what they found. Neither is permitted to. The 847 pages of documents recovered from the first 4 cases are part of an ongoing federal proceeding, whose details remain under seal. The 14 sealed envelopes have been opened by the appropriate authorities. Their contents are known to 7 people. None of those 7 people are the ones you would expect. Sterling Krause is still representing 2 of the DOJ officials who filed for administrative leave. The proceedings related to his clients have not been made public. He has given one statement to the press in the months since, which read in its entirety, "My clients look forward to the opportunity to address these matters in the appropriate forum." The Cessna citation with the dead transponder has not been located. Priya Venkataraman testified before the federal grand jury for 3 hours and 14 minutes on March 11, 2025. She answered every question asked of her. She did not exaggerate. She did not minimize. She used plain language and specific details, and the particular credibility of a person who has had 7 months to make sure that what they remember is exactly what they saw. When she walked out of the courthouse at 12:57 p.m., it was cold and clear and bright. The specific brightness of a winter day that has decided to try very hard, that is putting everything it has into the quality of its light, as though apologizing for all the gray days that came before it. She stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and let the cold air sit on her face. She called her mother. The phone rang twice. "Everything okay?" her mother asked. The voice warm and constant and entirely itself. The Sunday morning voice. The voice that had been the background frequency of Priya's entire life. The voice that assumed goodness and expected honesty and loved her with the uncomplicated permanence of something that had never needed to be decided. Priya looked out at the street. The ordinary Washington afternoon. Taxis and commuters, and a food truck, and a pigeon on a ledge, and the wide gray sky beginning to soften at its edges toward the pale gold of a winter afternoon. "Yes," she said. Her voice was level and warm and entirely her own. This time she was not lying. This time the word meant exactly what it said. Not the performed okay of the hotel room, not the managed okay of the months of waiting, not the okay of a woman holding herself together by the careful application of will and routine and Patricia's steady presence in the chair by the window. This okay was different. When this okay was the sound of a stone that had left a hand and traveled through the air and landed exactly where it needed to land, and the hand that had thrown it finally opening. She stayed on the phone with her mother for 22 minutes. She walked 6 blocks without paying attention to where she was walking. She ended up outside the department store where she had bought the navy blazer the afternoon before and stood in front of the window looking at her own reflection for a moment. A young woman in a pressed blazer on a bright, cold day, looking like someone who had just done the hardest thing she had ever done and was still standing. She looked like her father. She had not noticed that before. She smiled, not a large smile, not a performance of relief or triumph or any of the emotions that the movies would have assigned to this moment. Just a small, real, private smile. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that belongs only to the person wearing it. And the name. The name that Dr. F had spoken in the last 30 seconds of a 4-minute and 20-second phone call on a Saturday night in February, while Dara Okonkwo stood in her kitchen with her hand flat on the table and the watercolor of the Virginia countryside on the wall, and the furnace cycling quietly in the dark house around her. The name that was not a foreign government, not a rogue contractor, not anyone operating from the outside, from the shadows, from the comfortable criminal distance of someone who had learned to keep their hands clean by keeping them far from the thing itself. And the name that pointed to the center, the absolute center, the place where all the threads met and the web held its shape, and the key had been built by the only hands that could have built it. The hands that understood the architecture because they had helped design the architecture, that knew every door because they had helped install every door, that could build a ghost key because they had helped build the house the ghost moved through. That name is part of an ongoing federal investigation, which means it belongs, for now, to the process. Which means it belongs, for now, to the sealed rooms, and the classified proceedings, and the careful, patient, costly machinery of a system that Dara Okonkwo had believed in since she was 17 years old, watching her father drive home in silence from a courthouse in Columbus. A system that had failed her father, and that she had spent her entire adult life trying, one case at a time, to make worthy of the trust that people like him had placed in it. The system was working, slowly, imperfectly, at great personal cost to the people carrying it forward, but working, which was, in the end, the only thing that mattered. Which was, in the end, the thing that Priya Venkataraman had bet everything on when she sat in a kitchen at midnight with a houseplant named Gerald and a screenshot in her deleted photos folder and 11 blank pages waiting to be filled. She had been right to bet on it. The silence that held the name would not hold it forever, but it never did. It never does. And that is the story of the night that changed everything. A regular young woman sitting in a parking lot at 3 in the morning, too scared to move and too honest to stay quiet. An FBI agent who never forgot her father's face in that courthouse. A cargo hold, 5 black suitcases, and a secret so big that even the people trained to handle secrets had to sit down when they heard it. Sometimes the truth starts with one person, one moment, one decision to do the right thing, even when doing the right thing costs everything. Now we want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell us, where are you watching this from? We have people joining us from all over the world, and we love seeing where our community is coming from. Let us know your city, your country, wherever you are. You are part of this now. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it means the world to us. Every single like helps this story reach someone new, someone who needs to hear it, someone who needs to be reminded that ordinary people doing brave things still matter in this world. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and join our family. We tell stories like this one every single week. Stories that make you think. Stories that make you feel. Stories that remind you that the world is bigger and stranger and more human than the headlines ever show you. We are building something here, a community that believes in spreading curiosity, spreading truth, and spreading a little kindness along the way. So, subscribe, stay with us, and click on the video appearing on your screen right now, because your next story is already waiting for you. We will see you there.